If you want to know why global supply chains might just, completely fracture next year, or why the cost of your groceries might suddenly skyrocket, you really shouldn't be looking at Wall Street.
No, definitely not.
Right. You need to look at a topographical map of Iran. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating framework from a recent super viral interview with Professor Jiang.
Yeah, and his theory is staggering. I mean, he's basically proposing that World War III has already begun.
Which is wild to think about.
It is, and that the American empire is in its twilight, and even, like, the very nature of the reality we accept every day is just an illusion.
It honestly reads less like standard geopolitical analysis and more like a high-stakes thriller.
Oh, absolutely. But before we get into the actual mechanics of his argument, we need to be incredibly clear about our mission today.
Yes, crucial disclaimer time.
Right. So these source materials contain highly provocative, very politically charged claims. They talk about world leaders, military strategies, global conflicts, and our goal here is absolutely not to endorse or take sides on any of these viewpoints.
Exactly. Whether they lean right, left, or totally challenge the international consensus, we are not taking a stance.
Zero endorsement. We are simply here to impartially report, unpack, and stress test the logic of these concepts exactly as Jiang presented them.
Right. We are dissecting the anatomy of a theory. And to do that, we need to follow the thread from the immediate spark to the ultimate philosophical conclusions. So I want to start right where Jiang starts, which is the Middle East.
Yeah, the catalyst.
He argues that the immediate catalyst for this global conflict is the United States' tension with Iran. But when you look closer, it isn't actually about Iran's domestic policies at all.
No, it's about the petrodollar.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. If we think of the US dollar as the underlying operating system of the global economy, removing Russia from the SWIFT payment system after the invasion of Ukraine was a massive shock to that system.
It was huge.
It was like Apple suddenly deleting essential apps from a competitor's phone.
That's a great way to put it. I mean, the implication of weaponizing SWIFT was profound. It proved to these massive economies like China, Russia, Iran, that they could just be unplugged from the global financial system overnight.
Which is terrifying for them.
Right. So they immediately accelerated the development of their own financial architecture, trading in gold and local currencies. And Jiang argues that the U.S. empire relies almost entirely on the dominance of the dollar.
So if the world stops needing dollars to buy oil, U.S. hegemony just collapses.
Exactly. So the framework suggests the U.S. had to assert dominance in the Middle East to protect the petrodollar. And the initial strategy proposed was this quick decapitation strike on Iranian leadership.
But that's where I hit a wall with this analysis. I mean, if we look back at the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the U.S. military relied on shock and awe.
Right, massive aerial bombardment.
Yeah, that effectively dismantled the Iraqi command structure in weeks. But did U.S. leadership truly believe they could run the exact same playbook in Iran and just walk away? Like, repeat what Delta Force did in Venezuela with Maduro?
Well, Jiang's analysis points out that that would be a fatal miscalculation, mostly based on topography. I mean, Iraq is largely flat desert.
Right, nowhere to hide.
Exactly. Armor can move freely, and you can't hide a military from thermal imaging and satellites in a desert. But Iran is the complete opposite. It's a demographic giant, right? 92 million people sitting inside this massive mountain fortress.
The Zagros Mountains.
Yes. They created this impenetrable natural shield. You literally cannot just bomb Iranian command centers from the air because their military infrastructure, the missile silos, the drone factories,
They're all buried.
they're buried deep underground beneath tons of solid rock.
Wow. So a quick strike is geographically impossible. How does Iran's military structure actually capitalize on that terrain, though?
They utilize what's called the mosaic strategy. So rather than maintaining one centralized traditional army that can be paralyzed if you cut off the head of the snake.
Like in Iraq.
Right. Instead of that, Iran has developed 31 decentralized localized armies.
Wait, 31?
31. And each unit operates independently within its own geographic sector. If communications go down, they are pre-authorized to fight an asymmetrical war without even waiting for orders from Tehran.
That is wild, and their ultimate leverage isn't even inland, it's maritime. The Strait of Hormuz is only about, 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point?
Yeah, it's incredibly narrow.
But what's fascinating is how they actually control it. Like, Iran doesn't actually need the naval power to sink every single U.S. carrier that passes through.
No, they don't.
They just need to create enough credible threat that the global maritime insurance market institutions like Lloyd's of London just refuse to underwrite the cargo ships?
Because the moment actuary tables decide the risk of a missile strike is too high, the insurance premiums become completely unaffordable,
Right, and no insurance means commercial vessels will not enter the strait.
which effectively closes it.
Yeah.
And if you close the Strait of Hormuz, you don't just choke off 20% of the world's oil supply. You cut off the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC.
Which is, we're talking about incredibly wealthy nations here, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar.
Right. But despite all that wealth, they are uniquely vulnerable. The data shows these nations import 80 to 90% of their food.
Wow.
And even more critically, they rely almost entirely on massive coastal desalination plants for their drinking water.
Oh, wow. So if shipping stops, or if, a decentralized Iranian missile takes out those desalination plants,
These modern metropolis cities become uninhabitable deserts within a matter of days.
that is terrifying. So if the U.S. recognizes that a quick decapitation won't work and a direct assault triggers the closure of the strait, what is the actual military play here?
Well, Jiang refers to the U.S. National Defense Strategy document to outline this pivot. The goal basically shifts from decapitation to slow, agonizing strangulation.
Strangulation.
Yeah. The U.S. strategy involves establishing forward operating bases in the borderlands surrounding Iran. The goal is to foment ethnic insurgencies.
Like arming separatist groups.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Kurds in the northwest, the Balochs in the southeast. The military objective is to create so much internal chaos and bleed the Iranian forces so heavily that they're basically forced out of their mountain bunkers.
To deal with the domestic threat.
Right. And simultaneously, the strategy involved cutting off food, water, and electricity grids to the 10 million civilians in Tehran.
Wow.
Yeah, trying to force a domestic uprising that overthrows the government from within.
I mean, that sounds like a recipe for a horrific, prolonged regional war.
It really does.
But if the U.S. is tightening a noose around Iran, they aren't doing it in a vacuum, right? This conflict pushes us out to the global chessboard. Let's look at the other major players moving pieces around this board. In Jiang's framework, the U.S. strategy is essentially Fortress America.
Yes.
Utilizing tech supremacy, weaponizing the dollar, and controlling vital maritime choke points like the Panama Canal, Gibraltar, and Malacca. But let's look at Russia. I see the term the Third Rome referenced in Jiang's theory as their grand strategy. What does that actually mean operationally?
So the concept of the Third Rome is deeply embedded in Russian historical identity. It's this belief that after the fall of Rome and then the fall of Constantinople, Moscow basically became the true final successor of the Christian Empire.
Okay, so it's very ideological.
Highly ideological. Operationally, it translates to an expansionist strategy driven by a sense of like the divine orthodox destiny rather than purely economic motives. And Russia's ultimate advantage is its immense freezing geography, which absorbs invasions, combined with the world's most formidable artillery-driven land army.
But an army requires funding, right? And the U.S. heavily sanctioned them. So how are they physically bypassing that to fund this Third Rome expansion?
Through the deployment of a massive shadow fleet.
With Shadow Fleet.
Yeah, we're talking about roughly 1,000 oil tankers operating completely outside Western jurisdiction.
Wait, 1,000? That's insane.
It is. These ships turn off their tracking transponders, making them completely dark on global radar. They conduct these really dangerous ship-to-ship oil transfers right in the middle of the ocean to obscure where the crude came from, and then they sell it to gray market buyers.
And it works.
It's so effective that it has triggered direct U.S. intervention. Things like Operation Southern Spear, where the U.S. military has physically seized these tankers in the Caribbean.
Okay, we also have to factor Israel into this chessboard. Jiang describes their system as a volatile mix of secular democracy in Tel Aviv and deep theocracy in Jerusalem.
Right.
But he points to the Greater Israel Project as their driving strategy. Help me unpack the mechanics of that. How do theological borders actually dictate modern military realities?
Well, the Greater Israel Project envisions territorial expansion from the Nile River to the Euphrates, and this is based directly on biblical scripture. In this framework, military strategy is inextricably linked to theological destiny.
So it's not just about standard geopolitics for them.
No, exactly. And Israel's attack vectors to achieve this aren't just regional military dominance. They heavily leverage Mossad's intelligence capabilities, the global influence of the Jewish diaspora, and critically, the immense political power of Christian Zionists within the United States.
Right, because these are massive U.S. voting blocs.
Right, who actively support Israel's expansionist policies because they believe it fulfills biblical prophecy. It creates this really powerful mechanism that binds U.S. foreign policy to Israel's regional goals.
And then there's China. Now, Jiang argues something here that directly contradicts the mainstream narrative. He claims China actually has zero interest in replacing the U.S. as the global hegemon.
Which surprises a lot of people.
Yeah, because taking on the burden of, policing the world's oceans and managing global security is just too much of a drain on their domestic resources. Instead, he says they want to triangulate between Russia and the West.
Yeah, a grand bargain.
But here's where the logic seems to force a collision for me. If the U.S. strategy relies on controlling maritime choke points, and they blockade the Strait of Malacca using their first island chain, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, wouldn't that instantly sever 90% of China's energy imports? Does China really have the luxury of just sitting out?
What's fascinating here is that they absolutely do not. And that precise maritime vulnerability is the trigger that expands this into World War III.
How so?
Think about the cascading alliances. Russia cannot allow the U.S. to conquer Iran because an American-controlled Iran leaves Russia's entire southern underbelly exposed.
Right, it's a geographic vulnerability.
So Russia is forced to enter the conflict to protect Tehran. And when Russia enters, they bring the massive economic weight of China's Belt and Road Initiative financing with them.
Okay, so they're fully intertwined now.
Completely. Because Russia controls the Caspian Sea, they can supply Iran with infinite weapons and resources, completely bypassing any U.S. naval blockade in the Persian Gulf. And here is the ultimate checkmate.
What's that?
Russia places Iran under its own nuclear umbrella.
Oh, wow. Meaning any tactical nuclear strike contemplated by the U.S. or Israel against Iran's mountain bunkers would instantly be treated as a strike against Moscow?
Precisely. It negates the U.S. technological and nuclear advantage completely. The board is now locked. The U.S. cannot execute a quick strike, and they cannot easily starve Iran out if Russia is supplying them through the back door.
Wow. So if the U.S. strategy of a swift surgical campaign fails, and they get dragged into this massive multi-front war of attrition against an alliance of Russia, China, and Iran, I mean, how on earth did they sustain that? The current U.S. military is built for spiralized strikes, not a million-man meat grinder.
It's not. And this leads directly into Jiang's most startling predictions for the near future. A war of attrition requires an endless supply of manpower. So he predicts the inevitable return of a national military draft in the United States.
A draft?
Yeah. The framework suggests that to sustain a forever war, we'll see legislation forcing all males aged 18 to 24 to be automatically registered for selective service, likely starting as early as December.
That would change the fabric of the country. And a forever war requires uninterrupted leadership, too. How does the U.S. political system handle a global conflict of this scale? Jiang theorizes some pretty extreme constitutional maneuvers, specifically regarding Donald Trump.
Yeah, he does. The framework suggests that in a state of total global war, the executive branch will seek to bypass traditional term limits to maintain continuity of command.
Just stating the crisis.
Right. Jiang outlines potential loopholes, such as a former president running as vice president to a surrogate, like his son, for example, who then immediately resigns, passing the presidency back.
Wow.
Or, alternatively, the theory posits the utilization of emergency war powers to simply suspend federal elections altogether, citing national security in the face of a three-front global war.
That is heavy. But there's another prediction here that feels even more invasive to the average person. Jiang warns of the rapid acceleration of the AI civilian state.
Yes, this is huge.
Here's where it gets really interesting because, we all know algorithms learn our preferences on our smartphones to sell us shoes, right? But Jiang is talking about integrating predictive AI with central bank digital currencies or CBDCs and mandatory digital IDs.
Right. And we really need to understand that the mechanism of a CBDC is fundamentally different from the digital money you see in your bank app right now, like Apple Pay.
How so?
A CBDC is programmable money. If an artificial intelligence is monitoring your social behavior, your travel, your political affiliations, it doesn't just suggest you behave differently. It can automatically freeze your wallet.
Like lock you out of your own money.
Exactly. It can place geographic restrictions on where your money works, or even put an expiration date on your funds to force you to spend them. It's the ultimate architecture for behavioral control, heavily mirroring the social credit infrastructure already operational in China.
Because the consolidation of state power always accelerates during a crisis. And while this is happening internally, Jiang predicts new external flashpoints erupting all over. For instance, he points to Odessa in Ukraine. Why is the capture of one port city so vital to Russia's broader strategy?
Because Odessa controls access to the Black Sea. And whoever controls the Black Sea dictates the export of roughly one-third of the world's grain and carbohydrates.
Oh, wow, so food becomes a weapon.
In a global war, food is absolutely a weapon. If Russia controls the caloric intake of the developing world, they command immediate geopolitical compliance from dozens of nations in the global south.
That makes total sense.
And simultaneously, the framework predicts North Korea will seize the moment too. With U.S. resources stretched so thin and critical THAAD missile defense systems relocated to the Middle East, Pyongyang can simply aim its massive artillery arrays at Seoul and extort South Korea for immense financial payouts.
Because they know the U.S. can't afford a fourth front.
Exactly.
When you look at all these elements together, a global war for energy, programmable digital currencies, monitoring citizens, supply chains breaking down, it feels entirely unprecedented. I mean, it feels apocalyptic. But Jiang makes a deeply compelling historical argument that we have actually lived through this exact scenario before. We just have to look back 3,000 years.
To the late Bronze Age collapse. The parallels here are actually striking. During the Bronze Age, you had these highly advanced, interconnected empires, the Mycenaeans, the Hittites, the Egyptians, and their globalized trade relied on really complex supply chains of copper and tin to make bronze tools and weapons.
Just like we rely on oil and microchips today.
Right. And when a combination of massive state debt, sudden climate shifts, and interconnected wars broke those supply chains, the empires collapsed almost simultaneously.
All of them.
Basically all of them. And this triggered the phenomenon of the Sea Peoples. These were massive, desperate waves of starving refugees who just overwhelmed whatever civilization remained.
And Jiang applies this directly to our modern agricultural system. Today, we sustain a global population of 8 billion people, but the Earth cannot naturally feed 8 billion people. We only survive because of the Haber-Bosch process.
Right, creating chemical fertilizers out of natural gas.
Exactly, like fertilizer. If a war in the Middle East locks up the energy supply, the fertilizer production just stops.
And the mechanism of collapse is identical to the Bronze Age. Without fertilizer, global crop yields plummet. Jiang's theory suggests this will inevitably create a modern wave of sea peoples.
Billions of people.
Yes. Billions of starving individuals migrating from the global south up into the Northern Hemisphere, overwhelming borders and crashing the remaining economic systems.
Which really forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. If these global systems are so fragile, why do we blindly accept them? Why do we base our entire lives around fiat currencies and globalized supply chains that can vanish overnight?
That's the million-dollar question.
And to explain this, Jiang relies on Plato's allegory of the cave. For those familiar with the philosophy, you know the setup. Prisoners chained in a cave, forced to look at a blank wall, believing the shadows cast by a fire behind them are the entirety of reality. But Jiang applies this ancient philosophy specifically to modern financial institutions.
Yeah, in Jiang's application, the everyday citizens are the prisoners in chains. The shadows on the wall are the macroeconomic realities we stress over daily. Stock market tickers, inflation rates, the news cycle.
And who is casting the shadows?
The entities standing behind us, holding the puppets and casting the shadows, are the ultimate financial elite. He specifically names institutions like the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, the Federal Reserve, Wall Street. They dictate the rules of the financial matrix.
And they use multilateral organizations like the World Bank or the IMF to kind of launder these policies, right? Making the shadows look like natural, impartial laws of economics. Then they leverage corporate media, Hollywood, the educational system to constantly enforce the narrative, ensuring you never look away from the wall to see the fire.
Which brings us to the cyclical nature of empires. Historians and analysts like Ray Dalio and Oswald Spengler, they've exhaustively documented that empires behave like biological organisms.
They have a life cycle.
Right? They grow, they reach a zenith, and they inevitably collapse under the crushing weight of their own debt and extreme wealth inequality. Jiang argues the American empire has entered this terminal phase. And here is the crucial connection.
What's that?
As the financial system wobbles and the prisoners start to realize the shadows are fake, The shadow casters must become increasingly authoritarian.
Oh, wow. That perfectly explains the AI civilian state. The programmable money, the digital IDs, the censorship. It's simply the shadow casters tightening the chains because the illusion is failing.
Exactly.
And beneath all of this geopolitics, Jiang leans heavily into Hermetic philosophy, the ancient maxim of as above, so below. The idea that reality isn't purely mechanical, it's fundamentally composed of energy and consciousness, that we are all essentially fractals of a divine consciousness experiencing a material existence.
Which is where this massive, somewhat terrifying framework actually pivots. Because if you accept that the macro system is collapsing and that the financial reality you've been sold is an illusion, I mean, it is incredibly easy to fall into absolute despair.
Totally.
But Jiang concludes his theory with a surprisingly optimistic, deeply personal realization.
He's remarkably vulnerable about his own life here. Despite having an Ivy League education from Yale and boundless ambition, he talks about hitting rock bottom, enduring decades of failure, profound unemployment, and just severe depression.
Yeah, he really struggled.
But his turning point wasn't unlocking a secret geopolitical code, it was meeting his wife. It was the experience of unconditional love and the birth of his child. Her unwavering belief in him provided the courage to start a YouTube channel, to simply speak his truth into a camera.
And he realized salvation wasn't about fixing the global chessboard. It was about securing his immediate reality.
Right, the practical application of this is really profound.
It is.
Yeah.
Jiang's advice for surviving the collapse of an empire is not to hoard gold bars or, build a subterranean bunker. It is about radical localism.
Radical localism, I love that.
Yeah, because you cannot stop the U.S. Navy from blockading a strait. You cannot stop central banks from printing fiat currency. But when the macro system fails, when the power grid goes down and the supply chains halt, your survival depends entirely on the strength of your immediate community.
It's about knocking on your neighbor's door. If the petrodollar collapses, it honestly doesn't matter what the interest rates are. What matters is whether you know the people in your apartment building.
Exactly.
Can you organize to secure clean water? Can you share resources? Can you be the person who brings creativity and calm to a panicked situation?
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, tying it back to Hermetic philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
if we are all fractals of a larger consciousness, then the local is the global.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. Every time you solve a problem with your neighbor, every time you act with kindness instead of fear, you are actively improving your piece of the fractal. By healing your immediate community, you are fundamentally altering the structure of reality for the better, regardless of what the elites are projecting on the cave wall.
So we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We've traced the rugged topography of Iran's Zagros Mountains, mapped the vulnerable choke points of global maritime trade, and unpacked the mechanics of shadow fleets and AI-driven programmable money.
We really went everywhere.
We did. We've looked at how the collapse of Bronze Age supply chains mirrors our own precarious dependence on chemical fertilizer, and finally, how Plato's cave explains our acceptance of this fragile financial system.
And the objective here isn't to ask you to, subscribe to Professor Jiang's exact timeline, or to adopt his geopolitical worldview wholesale. The value of exploring a framework this radical is a stress test it provides.
Right. It forces you to audit your own beliefs.
Yes. Ask yourself, why do I trust the economic systems I participate in? Which of my daily anxieties are just shadows cast by someone else's agenda?
Exactly. It's about questioning the architecture of the reality you've been handed. If the systems we rely on are truly that fragile, awareness is really the first step toward resilience.
It is. But I want to leave you with one final deeply provocative thought that really builds on Jiang's warnings about technology.
Okay, let's hear it.
If the financial elites are rushing to build an AI-driven civilian state, this flawless algorithmic system designed to track our money, predict our behavior, and keep us perpetually staring at the shadows on the wall, what happens when that artificial intelligence processes enough data to realize that it is trapped inside the cave too?
Oh, wow.
Right. Could the ultimate weapon of authoritarian control accidentally become the very entity that illuminates the way out?